Between 1950 and 1990, India ran one of the largest economic experiments in human history, attempting to build a massive nation through strict state controls, central planning, and a closed economy. Why did this model survive for 40 years, and what caused its ultimate shift in 1991? Today, we are analyzing a foundational period in modern economic history, India from 1950 to 1990. On August 15, 1947, India woke to freedom after nearly 2 centuries of British colonial rule. The nation was independent, but its economy was severely fractured. The incoming leadership faced an unprecedented challenge. What kind of economic model would lift hundreds of millions of people out of absolute poverty? Let's trace how India designed its economic destiny over these 4 critical decades. The first major decision was selecting an economic framework or a model. Independent India needed to answer 3 basic questions: what to produce, how to produce, and how to distribute it. While capitalism relied purely on the market demand and purchasing power, it risked leaving the poorest citizen completely behind. On the other end of the spectrum, extreme Soviet style socialism completely abolished private property, a path that was incompatible with Indian democratic values. Hence, then Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru and other early thinkers chose a middle path, a mixed economy. Here, the state would control the commanding heights of industrial planning, while the private enterprise and property rights were preserved and encouraged. To guide this mixed economy, the Planning Commission was established in 1950, heading by the Prime Minister himself, launching the era of the 5 year plans. Every plan balanced 4 core national goals: growth, modernization, self reliance, and equity. Growth means expanding the country capacity to produce goods and services directly measured by the rising GDP. Modernization required adopting advanced technologies and updating social outlooks. You can say social reforms also, such as recognizing equal rights for women in the workplace, women's empowerment. Self reliance was deemed essential to eliminate dependence on foreign food supplies and protect national sovereignty. Finally, equity ensured that economic prosperity directly reached the poorest section of society, guaranteeing basic needs like housing, healthcare, and education. True strategic national planning effectively began with India's landmark second 5 year plan. The master strategist behind this phase was the world renowned statistician Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobis. He envisioned a structural approach where 5 year benchmarks were anchored into a large 20-year perspective. Mahalanobis' model dictated that the government must manage critical infrastructures like heavy industrial manufacturing, electricity generation, and large scale irrigation, while leaving secondary consumer items to open market forces. When India gained independence, nearly 75% of the population depend entirely on agriculture. Yet, productivity was stagnant due to outdated colonial rent collection system. The state enacted sweeping land reforms to establish equity. Intermediaries like the zamindars were legally abolished, bringing roughly 200 lakh tenants into direct contract with the government. This shift aimed to give an actual tiller a direct financial incentive to improve their land and increase crop output, and so as their social prestige. Additionally, land ceiling was introduced to limit the maximum acreage an individual could own, approximately 2 acres, reducing the concentration of wealth also. Despite land reforms, India heavily reliant on unpredictable monsoon, frequently triggered severe food shortages, forcing the country to import grains from United States under PL 480 schemes. And that's a kind of a scheme which is or which was basically a diplomatic pressure point. This structural vulnerability was permanently broken by the Green Revolution in the mid 1960s. By introducing high yielding variety seeds alongside fertilizer, pesticides, and regular irrigation, crop yields skyrocketed. India rapidly achieved absolute food self sufficiency. This generated a substantial marketed surplus, which lowered related food prices for low income citizens and enabled the government to build secure buffer stock for emergencies. However, this new agricultural technology came with high input costs. To encourage poor farmers to adopt HYV technology or be a part of the Green Revolution, the government offered massive subsidies on fertilizer and electricity. Over time, this created an intense economic debate. Critics argued that subsidies had become unsustainable, especially because it creates fiscal burden that encourage the wasteful overuse of scarce water resources. Furthermore, a major policy limitation became apparent by 1990. While agriculture's overall contribution to national GDP declined significantly, the percentage of the workforce trapped in agriculture barely shifted, moving from 67.5% down to only 64.9%. The industrial and service sector was simply not expanding fast enough to absorb surplus agricultural labor, which also known as sometimes disguised unemployment. Switching our focus to the industrial landscape now. Economists recognize that the developing nation can achieve stable employment and modernization only through robust industrialization. Nowadays, we know it as Make in India programs. At independence, India's industrial footprint was exceptionally narrow, restricted primarily to cotton, textile, and jute. Private industrialists lacked the immense financial capital and market incentive to launch heavy infrastructure projects because there was hardly any demand for that. Therefore, the state has to step in to fund and manage core manufacturing platforms, successfully diversifying India's industrial base into electronics, chemicals, heavy machineries by 1990s. This industrial strategy was institutionalized by the Industrial Policy Resolution of 1956, which formed the bedrock of the socialist pattern of society. It categorized the industries into three tiers: absolute state monopolies, mixed sectors where the state led new departments, and an open private sector. The third one, obviously. However, the private sector was tightly regulated through a strict government licensing system. No private firm could set up a factory, expand production volumes, or even diversify product line without the explicit official permits. While this policy effectively drove regional equality by offering tax incentives to firms operating in economically backward areas, a kind of east-west divide, where the western side is considerably more prosperous than the eastern side, as we all know, it also introduced massive administrative red tape that lead to corruption to some extent. Closely tied to industrial planning was India's inward looking trade strategy. Known technically as import substitution, the core objective or belief was to completely replace the global imports with domestic production to protect domestic infant industries from advanced foreign competition and their deep pockets and technology. The state implemented two primary mechanisms: heavy tariff and remember the term Donald Trump. However, he was not there at that point of time, so can't be blamed for now. Again, heavy tariff to make foreign products expensive, strict quotas to rigidly limit the physical quantities of goods imported. Planners assumed that shielding domestic producers would give them the time needed to learn to compete globally while conserving valuable foreign exchange. reserves. So it basically means that the domestic industries will learn and gain expertise, technology, and capital, and later on can have a fair competition with the foreign global players. And it also serve as an instrument of saving the foreign exchange reserves, which at that point of time was too little and so too valuable, because India is energy scarce country. We don't have oil reserves or better coal or natural gas, at least not discovered at that point of time. So, what is the ultimate verdict on India's economy between 1950 and 1990? The achievements were undeniably impressive in several areas. The industrial sector achieved a commendable 6% annual growth rate, and its share of national GDP rose from 13% to 24.6%. The Green Revolution secured food safety and industries become heavily diversified. However, severe structural inefficiencies also emerged. Protected by high trade barriers, domestic firms faced no competition, removing their incentive to improve product quality or even innovate. The licensing framework transformed into a restrictive permit license Raj, where businesses spend more time lobbying ministries than optimizing factories. Furthermore, state enterprise monopolized non-strategic fields, running commercial hotels, bread manufacturing companies, while incurring massive public losses. By 1919, these mounting internal contradictions made systematic economic reforms inevitable, setting the stage for India's historic liberalization in 1991. But by 1990, the foundation built over these 40 years began to crack under the weight of its own regulations. A historic financial crisis was looming, and the nation was just weeks away from a total economic shutdown. How did India maneuver through the brink of the bankruptcy to emerge into a globalized economy we know today? Join us in the next chapter as we decode the 1991 reforms. If you found this journey through our economic history insightful, please hit subscribe, share this video. Your support helps us continue producing these in-depth documentary analysis. We value your perspective, so please comment below. Do you believe 1950s planning model was necessary sacrifice for the long term? Let's discuss. Till the next video, take care, goodbye.